Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our very first live Facebook series here at Help the Hellbender. We're really excited that the technology worked this time, and we hope that everyone is receiving our live feed just fine. My name is Rod Williams. I'm one of the folks here at Purdue Extension in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources that run the Help the Hellbender program out of the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. You're going to meet a couple of my other colleagues here in just a minute. I think we have a really exciting program lined up for you. You're going to get to talk to at least 2 or 3 of our Hellbender experts. You're going to get to see a tour of our research facility, learn a little bit about what we do in terms of captive propagation, and then you're going to have lots of opportunities throughout the program to ask all of our experts questions. So if you have questions that have been eating at you for a long period of time, today's the day that you're hopefully going to get some answers. So we're going to have several segments, and at the end of each segment, we're going to have opportunities for you to ask questions to our particular experts that's delivering that message. Our very first expert is Nick Bergmeyer, who is the project coordinator for all of our field-related activities here at Help the Hellbender. And Nick is going to start the program off talking a little bit about some of the really interesting facts around Hellbenders. Nick, the floor is yours.
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm here at the Indiana DNR's O'Bannon Woods State Park, hanging out with their Hellbenders and their snapping turtle. The Hellbenders don't really like to come out, so you probably won't get to see them, but the snapping turtle he'll sit around here and make a lot of noise throughout this. So what is a Hellbender? So this is a fake Hellbender, but this is exactly what they look like. Hellbender is the largest salamander in North America. It's the 3rd largest in the world behind the Chinese and Japanese giant salamanders. And these guys can get anywhere, an adult Hellbender, a mature adult Hellbender would be anywhere from about 1.5 feet to 2.5 feet long. So they're much larger than what most people think about when they think about salamanders. Now these guys can be found in Indiana. They're only found in one stream in southern Indiana, and they used to historically be found throughout the Midwest, really from Illinois down to Missouri, all the way down to northern Mississippi, over to North Georgia, and then up through the Appalachian Mountains into southern New York, and then kind of down the Ohio River back into Indiana. But unfortunately, they've declined in most areas. They're no longer found in Illinois. In Indiana, they're only found in the one river, the Blue River in southern Indiana, and Washington, Harrison, and Crawford counties. And then they've disappeared from most parts of Ohio. And that's sort of the pattern that we see throughout most of their range, except for in the Appalachian Mountains. You can still find a lot of Hellbenders in the Appalachian Mountains, sort of away from people and away from disturbance. Now, even in areas where there are a lot of Hellbenders, or where there have been Hellbenders for the last several hundred years with people, most people have never heard of them, or at least they've never seen them. And there's a few reasons for that. So one of the unique things about Hellbenders, and this is different than most salamanders, is that Hellbenders they're a fully aquatic salamander, so they never come out of the water. Most other types of salamanders that people are familiar with spend at least some portion of their life in the water. Not all, but most of them. But Hellbenders, they never come out of the water. And they tend to, they live only in rivers and streams, so they don't live in ponds. But they tend to like the really rocky areas of rivers, so the areas with giant boulders, and that's where Hellbenders like to live. So if you were in a river that had Hellbenders, if you see like a big 3-foot boulder or a boulder the size of a car, that's where the Hellbenders like to hang out. So people just really don't get the opportunity to see them very often. One of the other things about them is that they're mostly nocturnal, so they come out at nights. People aren't usually hanging out in the streams in the middle of the nights. And when they do come out, it's usually to look for food. And for Hellbenders, this mostly means crayfish. So they really love crawdads. That is their preferred food. They'll eat some other things like small fish, or any small animal that they can fit in their mouth. But crayfish is really their main thing. Now, another reason you might see a hellbender out crawling around in late August through September and early October, that's their breeding season, and they will even come out during the day during that time of the year. So another especially unique thing about hellbenders, even not just with salamanders, but with most animals, is that the hellbender males actually take care of the nests. So the hellbender male will find a big rock, a nice suitable nest rock, and he'll stay under that rock for a long period of time, and the females will actually come to him, and they'll go under the rock, they'll lay their eggs, he'll fertilize the eggs, and the female will leave, and the male will guard those eggs for anywhere from a month and a half to 2 months, and then those eggs hatch, and he might even guard the larvae for a little while longer. So he really just tries to make sure that there aren't predators getting in there eating the eggs. So when the hellbenders hatch, they're only about an inch long, and the larvae have these feathery gills that are off the backs of their heads, and they stay that way for about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years, and then they actually absorb those gills. And at that point, they just look like they're juvenile hellbenders, and they really just look like a little mini hellbender. And they'll be a juvenile for about anywhere from 4 to 6 years until they're about 7 or 8 years old. And that's the point where they can actually reproduce. So it takes a hellbender almost 7 to 8 years before they can actually reproduce. So these guys, once they get to that point, they can live anywhere from another 15 to 20, or maybe even longer than that. So they can live up to about 30 years, which is especially long-lived for most animals, but especially a salamander. Rod, I think we can have time for questions.
Thank you, Nick. So if you have questions, please go to the comment section and place your questions in there, and we will do our best to get your question read on the air, as well as direct it toward Nick, and he can answer those particular questions. I'm trying to check the message board now. Any comments or questions at this point? So if you think of anything, again, throughout this particular program, just drop it in the comment section and we'll do our best. So as you're thinking about questions, what Nick just said, I'm going to go ahead and switch into the program and introduce you to Shelby Royal, who is our coordinator for our Hellbender husbandry work out at the Aquaculture Research Lab. And Shelby's going to give you a virtual tour of our facility, show you some of our animals, talk a little bit about the current research that we're doing. And again, at the end of Shelby's segment, we'll have an opportunity for you to ask her questions in those comment boxes. Shelby, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. So thank you, Rod. So like I said, I'm Shelby, and I am the Hellbender Husbandry Coordinator here at Purdue. So I'll give you guys a virtual tour of our facility. So when we get the eggs, like Nick said, they usually get them around October or November, and we have them in what is called our rearing room. So we will collect the eggs, and they will actually go into these little glass quarantine tanks over here. So there's 4 of them along this back wall, and they'll stay in those tanks until they hatch. After they hatch, they will get moved to these blue tanks here. There's 12 tanks on each side, so making it about 24 tanks. And in those tanks, they will stay for about another 1 to 2 years. After that, they'll actually get transferred over. Show you guys that area real quick. So after the 1 to 2 years in our rearing room, they will actually get transferred over into what is called our raceway room. And what is cool about our raceway room is actually they get conditioned with different water volumes and currents to help them be able to survive better once they get released. So there's 4 tanks on this wall, and then there's 2 tanks in the back wall, so making 6 tanks over here, and then we have another 6 tanks on this side. I would love to be able to show you guys those rooms, but unfortunately I am in a remote area, so I can't really show you the rooms very well. But they'll stay in in the raceway room for about another 2 to 3 years. And after that, they will get transferred over into what is called our large raceway. Now, this is actually really cool. The system's not running at the moment, but this is how we get them conditioned for release in July to be able to adapt to river systems. So this one will have a faster moving current. It's going to have fluctuations with water temperature that during the seasons that you'll kind of see. And then it just gets them ready for when we release them in July. So we actually have them in these huts as well. So what these huts do is we'll hopefully get them ready for when we release them in July to put in the Blue River, so that way they have a higher survival rate. Now, let's see if we got some, oh, there's one Hellbender right there. Let's see if he wants any of his friends to come hang out. Oh. So these are going to be our juvenile Hellbenders. So these guys are around 5 years old. And what's really cool about this project is because they are an endangered species, we actually get to see them and be with them every day, but it does require a lot of permits and protocols that we have to obtain from the Indiana Fish and Wildlife Service. So it's really cool that we get to be able to see these guys every day. All right. So these are our Hellbenders.
So thank you, Shelby. I'm going to go ahead and bring Nick back on as well. Nick, there was a couple of questions that perhaps you can address now as well. And lots of questions coming in. So Jeremiah Jonathan has asked all of us, have we ever been bitten by a Hellbender?
I have never been bit by a Hellbender, no. They try.
I've come very close.
I have attempted to be bitten by a Hellbender, and as a herpetologist, I oftentimes get asked, you know, when I work with salamanders or snakes or turtles, do I ever get bitten? And the short answer, or does the animal bite? And my general response is, if it has a mouth, it's fully capable of biting, and that's usually an animal's one of their way of defending themselves. Going through some other questions. That's phrasing. Other questions, how long have we been breeding in captivity? We're actually, our next series in 2 weeks is going to be talking about our partners who are actually breeding Hellbenders. We're rearing Hellbenders in captivity, ultimately to release those back into the wild. So we're not focused on breeding. We bring the eggs in for where the breeding takes place in nature, rear the eggs in captivity, and then release those back into the wild. We have a couple more questions rolling in, but go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say, and we've been rearing Hellbenders in captivity since about 2012.
Yeah, so we do have some 8-year-old Hellbenders in the facility, some of which may be in the ones that Shelby has shown you. So I'm going to go back to Nick. And so Shelby's introduced you to our rearing facility with, again, our goal of rearing these Hellbenders to a size that helps them elude most predators when we release them back into the wild. And Nick's role really is to coordinate all the research efforts after the animals are reintroduced back into the river. So Nick, I'm going to turn it back over to you and let you share with folks a little bit about what we do in after they've been reared and left our facility.
All right, so we spend, those Hellbenders stay in captivity for anywhere from 3 to 6, some of them we've actually even had for 8 years. And when we release those, the ultimate goal is to really, those animals that we release, is to have them have as high a survival as possible. So in captivity, we do a lot of these research experiments to try to, these conditioning experiments to try to improve their survival in the wild. And to evaluate that, once we release them, we have a couple of things we do. So first, we do something that's called a soft release. So when you're talking about animals, there's a hard release, which is basically you just take the animal and you throw it out and wish it luck. And then there's a soft release, which is giving the animal a chance to acclimate to its environment. So what we do for Hellbenders is we build these big twin-sized mattresses or they're about the size of a twin-sized mattress. cages full of boulders, and then we put a large second cage over top of it, and we release the hellbenders into that second cage, and they can burrow down into those boulders and they can't escape. And that holds them there for about 3 days and just gives them a chance to de-stress and get used to the new conditions. And then we take that outer cage off and then they have the opportunity to move about as they please. So in order to figure out if they survive, we do something called radio telemetry, and it's going to be hard to show you a little bit. I don't have a lot of room here, but we implant a small transmitter right there. We implant that. That's not even an inch long. We implant that transmitter inside the hellbender, and it lets off a radio signal, and that allows us to pick that up with an antenna, and we can follow the hellbenders around everywhere they go. So we can see what rocks they hide under. We can see if they stay in the area we release them, or if they move up or downstream. We can find out if they're getting eaten. So we know that a lot of our hellbenders have fallen prey to certain animals. And so that's really what this radio telemetry allows us to do, is we can figure out how well they survive, what our problems are, and that gives us ideas for the future to see, well, maybe we can work on this to try to improve the survival of these animals that we release. So those are the ways that we really work to help hellbenders. And a lot of people ask us, how can we help hellbenders? How can the regular person help hellbenders? And there's several things that people can do. So one of the big things is if you happen to be a farmer, and this is more of a large scale problem, but if you're a farmer, what we really ask is that you talk to your local soil and water conservation district or your NRCS conservationist, and those individuals have all sorts of information about cost share monies to help actually improve your soil retention, so you don't lose the soil that you need, and improve the environment and the water quality for hellbenders. If you're not a farmer, if you're just a landowner or a homeowner, some of the main things that we recommend are sort of responsible disposal of chemicals or medicine. So one thing a lot of people don't know is that when you pour certain chemicals down the drain or in the street, or you flush your medicines, most wastewater treatment plants can't actually filter that stuff out. So it ends up going directly into the river, and most of that stuff can be absorbed by aquatic animals. Some of the other things we recommend are, if you live next to a river, even if it's just a small stream, that you leave a small couple of strips, maybe a couple more wide strips of unmown vegetation right next to the stream, and that does a couple of things. It filters out any runoff that might be going into the stream, and it also helps keep your stream bank from eroding and just falling into the river. And also for fishermen, if you ever happen to catch a hellbender, a lot of the times when hellbenders eat, they actually end up sucking the hook down into their throats or into their stomach. And so we really just recommend cutting the line and letting that hook stay there, and they will eventually dissolve it. Otherwise, you run the risk of just sort of tearing out their stomach or their throat, and that's generally not good. So that's really, those are our main recommendations, and I think we have some more time for questions.
Great, thanks, Nick. We do have quite a few questions that came in over the last couple of segments, so I'm going to take a moment for those. We have Wendy Moyer-Kazerski. She asked a question about genetic testing, and if we've done any testing, or are there any considerations being made with regard to releasing animals back in the wild, given their respective genetics? And the short answer is yes. We actually did a lot of genetics work back in 2010 to 2013, where we sampled about 1,300 hellbenders all across the country, so that we not only had the population genetics and the genetic signature of what was going on here in Indiana, we had populations across the country, 10 states, 72 rivers, to compare it. And the good news is the genetic variation is really high in Indiana. We also know which populations are probably the most closely related to hellbenders, so we know where to go get animals if we need to use those as source populations for reintroductions, and that's really found within the Ohio River drainage. And we know how related each of the hellbenders are to one another within the state. So we have a really great genetic profile, not only within Indiana, but across their entire geographic distribution. So that's a really great question. And Nick, you may have touched on this, but Patricia Dickerson asked, do we tag the hellbenders upon recapture or upon release?
We have what we do with our hellbenders. All of our hellbenders that we release have what are called pit tags, which is a passive integrated transponder. And that's basically, it's the same thing that your vet puts in your dogs and your cats. So we put that in the hellbender's tail, and we can, whenever we recapture a hellbender, we can wave a little reader over top of it and it pops up the number. So all of our hellbenders have an individual ID tag. And we also do that for wild hellbenders. So whenever we catch a wild hellbender, we can scan it. We can see if we caught it. I've caught hellbenders that we've caught 12 years ago, and they're still out there crawling around. And so we can tell which ones are our released hellbenders, which ones are the wild hellbenders. And so they basically we have hundreds of hellbenders tagged at this point.
Melinda Burton also asked, will the hellbenders only be released into the Blue River, other rivers, or is there a plan in general for the release here in Indiana?
There is a plan. There's a short-term plan and a long-term plan. So short-term, all of our hellbenders for the next several years are going into the Blue River. So that's the river where we still have hellbenders. There's still wild hellbenders out crawling around. We still occasionally find eggs. So we're really trying to repopulate this core population, see if we can get that built up to the point where it can actually reproduce on its own. And then at that point, we plan on branching out. So we might move, there's an upper section of the Blue River that we plan on moving into. And then there are a few other rivers here in southern Indiana that we've evaluated to see if they have good habitat, and they do, and they seem to have good water quality. So we'll move into those, but probably not for several more years. And we are continuing to evaluate more and more rivers in southern Indiana to see if they would be suitable for hellbenders.
So Melinda, we work really closely with the Department of Natural Resources, Division of Fish and Wildlife here in Indiana. We meet quite regularly with them to make a release plan, and that does change from year to year, but we do have a 4 to 10 year plan, much of what Nick just described. To follow up on that, we have Laura Branby. How many will you release each year? So Nick, you can just give a little overview of generic numbers of our releases over the next 3 years.
Yeah, so it really varies. For the last few years, we've been releasing roughly 40 to 80 hellbenders per year. But that was mostly due just because we didn't have a lot of hellbenders in captivity. But we've recently, we've formed a partnership with Ohio DNR and Kentucky Division of Fish and Wildlife. And so we're now getting eggs from each of those states every year. So the number of hellbenders we have in captivity has expanded greatly over the last couple of years. And so for the next few years, we should be releasing hundreds of hellbenders per year as opposed to just 40 or 50 per year. So the program is really ramping up.
So we have an additional question on the release by Madison Cordes. She is asking, can the public be present at the releases? And Madison, at this point, with the hellbenders being an endangered species, the releases are largely closed to members of the Help the Hellbender team and their partners, the partnering zoos that are helping us rear our captive hellbenders, and then members of the Division of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife here in Indiana, and a few select landowners that give us access to their property. So as of right now, the releases aren't open to the public. One more question before we go into the next segment. Nancy Lilly is asking, what animals eat hellbenders?
Oh, there's a lot of animals that eat hellbenders. So when hellbenders are small, when they first hatch and up to the point when they're maybe only 5 or 6 inches, pretty much any animal that can fit them in their mouths will eat them. So bass, catfish, crayfish will actually eat the small hellbenders. Other hellbenders will eat each other. But once they get to this point, this one's about 20 inches long. Once they get to full grown size, really their main predators are going to be river otters and raccoons. And those are about the only two things that'll eat a full grown adult hellbender. I forgot to mention, actually, snapping turtles will eat hellbenders, and so will water snakes. They'll eat smaller hellbenders, but once they get full size, you're pretty much just looking at raccoons and otters.
So one of the questions that I oftentimes get asked is, what can I do and what can we do to help hellbenders? And Nick talked a little bit about that, but really the most important first step for most of us is to learn as much as we can about hellbenders. And for those of you tuning in, you're trying to do just that. But, here at Help the Hellbender, we work on research, we work on conservation, but we also work to promote educational information. So I would urge you to get on to helpthehellbender.org. I know most of you, if you're joining us here, you're familiar with our social media presence with Help the Hellbender. We also have a website, helpthehellbender.org, whereby we produce a lot of educational information. We help promote educational information made by our partners throughout the country. And there's opportunities on the website for you to go and request these. If you would like some of the copies of our educational information, you can just simply request that online through helpthehellbender.org. Send us a self-addressed stamped envelope, and we'll try to honor your request and send you what other materials. So we have things like this Help the Hellbender brochure, which has a lot of the information that we just discussed in here, as well as a list of all the participating zoos where you can go to see hellbenders, who to contact about hellbenders if you're in any state in which hellbenders occur. We also have, of course, things that are very popular are things like our Hellbender stickers. We have one that says, "Be a hero, helpthehellbender.org." We have a more traditional Hellbender sticker. Again, if you're interested in receiving these, send a self-addressed stamped envelope. I will post the address to send that to a little bit later after the program. Again, self-addressed stamped envelope. We'll try to get those to you. Other types of information, we have one on how our zoos help the hellbenders. It's a great way to show how our zoos are coming online and either participating in rearing and hellbenders for their eventual release, or breeding hellbenders to provide us with eggs to rear in captivity, again, to release back into the wild. We also have a video game. So if you get on the iTunes apps or the App Store, you can search for Hellbender Havoc. It's a free video game which walks you through various stages of a hellbender's life cycle, from a small larvae all the way up to an adult, and it presents you with a lot of the challenges, environmental challenges that Nick talked about earlier. And it's a really great fun way for your kids, or perhaps you, to play a video game. We also have some, if you're a teacher or you know a teacher who might be interested in teaching about aquatics or animal adaptations, we have a lot of curriculum on helpthehellbender.org specific with hellbenders that are STEM standard based lesson plans that teachers can download for free and use to teach in the classroom. I'm trying to see if we have any other questions. One of the questions that a lot of people are asking, and I'm going to bring Shelby back as we're doing this. I don't know how many questions we've had, but we've had quite a few, is how do you go about getting the t-shirts that Nick and Shelby are sporting? We don't actually sell t-shirts here, but we are able to purchase t-shirts if we receive donations. So at this point, we don't have any t-shirts to offer you. We have had programs in the past where, again, people would donate monies and we could give t-shirts away, but we're not quite there at that particular time. One last question by Jenny Ratcliffe. Is there a target for the maximum number of animals that we're releasing? If so, what is your plan when that happens?
We do have a target. It's actually site-based, so it's release site-based. So what we do is we find a stretch of suitable habitat in the river, and then we calculate the number of hellbenders we want to release there based on what we've seen from our population and other populations. So we have a certain density of hellbenders we want to reach, which for ours is one hellbender per 100 meters squared, which, for our sites, that varies between about 50 hellbenders to almost 200 hellbenders that we need to release. So it really just varies, but it is all site-based. So these rivers are going to be getting thousands of hellbenders because for the Blue River, for example, right now we're focused on, I think it's 13 specific release sites in the Blue River, and then there are more that we're planning on focusing on in the future. So there's a lot of hellbenders that will be released, but we don't have an absolute number. We just have that density number per site.
So there's a couple more points that I'd like to make. So if you have any remaining questions, now's the time to place those into the comment box, and we'll try to get those answers before the conclusion of the program. The next thing I want to talk about are partnerships. Here at Help the Hellbender, we've been running this program since about 2007, and since that time we have grown dramatically in terms of who's helping us help the Hellbender. And our foremost supporters are the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and of course our Department of Natural Resources, Division of Fish and Wildlife here in Indiana. Been tremendous supporters from day one and continue to be so. So we work with a lot of federal agencies. We work with state agencies, not only here in Indiana, but across state lines as well. We work with a whole suite of zoos, as I mentioned, talking about our breeding facilities, our captive rearing facilities. We work with non-government organizations, private organizations, landowners, NRCS. We just work with a huge range of partners. It really does take a consortium to be able to conserve hellbenders, not only within Indiana, but across the country as well. So we want to certainly thank our partners for the role that they play in helping the hellbenders. Are there any other questions? So it sounds like we don't have any other questions. Nick, Shelby, anything you'd like to add?
I'm positive that somebody asked, how did the hellbender get its name, Rod?
They did.
So how did the hellbender get its name, Rod?
I just got pointed out that question I overlooked. Where was that question? While we're looking for that, how can you tell a male from a female?
Oh,
well, that was asked by Lena Roy. No, wait. The questions are scrolling in. So Christine Fisher asked, how can you differentiate males from females? Well, you can only do so with external morphology by looking at them for about a month out of the year, and that's usually between August, September, October. The males during the breeding season have a swollen area right behind their hind legs that resembles a donut around their cloaca, whereas females do not. Females, if they're gravid or full of eggs, oftentimes are huge and sausage shaped, and their lateral skin folds are actually stretched tight because they're so full of eggs. But again, that's usually 1 month out of the year. Karen Royal Millikar, how did they get their name? Nick, I'm gonna let you take that one.
So how did they get their name? So we don't know for sure, but the general idea is that back when the settlers showed up and they saw these things, they really thought they looked like something from hell that was bent on returning. So that's the story. That's why we call them hellbenders. They actually have a lot of other names. So some people call them mud dogs. Some people call them old lasagna sides, because it's hard to see on here, but they've got these big folds of skin. Rod mentioned the lateral skin folds, and they look like lasagna noodles, so they call them old lasagna sides. My personal favorite is snot otter, because they live in the water, and if you touch them, they're super slimy, and they just drip ooze, which is really more of a protective thing for them, but to us, it just feels like snot. So those are just a handful of the names they have.
And as you can see, we're always a little bit hesitant to talk about how the Hellbender got its name, the various Hellbender nicknames, because none of those are particularly endearing, but it is what it is at this point. So Elena Royal asked all of us, how did we get into this line of work? So Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you first.
I mean, I feel like I've kind of always been in this line of work, because I was out carrying around snakes when I was like 4 years old. And basically I spent all of my childhood chasing bugs and snakes and salamanders. And so it was sort of natural for me to go. I went to Purdue University and got a master's, or a bachelor's and a master's, both in wildlife science. and I worked for the DNR as just doing tech jobs during the summer, and so it was always kind of natural for me to do this kind of work.
Shelby?
Well, I never honestly thought I would be working with Hellbenders specifically or amphibians. So I actually had a different career path when I first started. I was in nursing for a while and then decided I didn't like that. So I changed over to Purdue for the wildlife sciences. And Rod was actually one of my professors. And I graduated last May. And so about December, he contacted me asking if I would like a job for a different job. And then this position came available and I couldn't say no because they got cute little toe beams and I just couldn't deny it. So.
And my story is very similar to Nick's. I've always been interested in amphibians and reptiles. I grew up on a farm in southern Indiana where my dad was a great amateur naturalist, and he taught me to really appreciate nature and be able to understand what's going on in terms of ecology. So I also went to Purdue and wildlife science, and as a brand new faculty member back in 2008, the DNR worked with the Indiana Department of Natural Resources on the very first Hellbender project in the state and have been doing it ever since. And so I can't think about doing anything else. We've been have a very successful program, again, largely due to the great partnerships that we've built over the last decade or so. So I want to close today talking about our next series. So we're going to offer these at least for the next 2 weeks on Thursdays at 3 p.m. And I'm really excited to announce that next week we're going to be having a live webinar series, a live Facebook series with the Wilds with Dr. Steve Spear, who's going to talk about what they do at their facility in terms of captive rearing. They're going to focus a little bit on different age classes and some of the research that they're engaged with that's actually not only specific to the wilds, but across the country. It's called using eDNA to sample for hellbenders across the country. So we hope you tune in next Thursday at 3 p.m. where we're working with Dr. Stephen Spear at the Wilds, and we're going to learn all about what they're doing. And then after that program next week, I'll share with you what we're going to have the following week. Are there any remaining questions? So again, we're really excited that you guys tuned in. You asked a lot of really great questions. We hope that we were able to answer everything that people wanted. If not, continue to drop some comments on the Hellbender Facebook page. We're always on hand to try to answer any questions. But until then, we want to just thank you for all that you do with Help the Hellbenders in your area. Until next week, we'll see you then. Bye.